Hi, Alice.
Hi, Grandpa.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
This is pretty exciting. I get to hang out with you a lot with choir and everything, but this is
Yeah,
a totally different thing,
yeah,
which is kind of cool.
yeah. I like it.
Good.
I
Me
like
too.
it. Yeah.
Um, so today, here I am interviewing you for this wonderful project, and
It is a wonderful project. It
I know.
really is. It really is a wonderful project.
So I wanted to start it off with a quote about that lends itself to our topic that was interesting to me. So I will try to speak slowly. It says, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain: when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person as you were when you walked in." So that takes us to the topic of struggle. And that is my topic for today. One of the interesting things that I think is kind of funny to point out as it pertains to struggle and how people perceive it and process it now, in my generation specifically, I've noticed there's kind of always an overwhelming sense of optimism. Um, a lot of people confuse that, and sometimes rightfully so, with entitlement. We I think have been known as a generation for entitlement. But we're just always inundated with encouragement and the world is your oyster, and you can be anything you want to be, and all of that, which is really interesting. It gives a different perspective, I think, on the concept of struggle. And there's this idea of, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. That's kind of empowering and cool. It's an interesting thing for me to be a part of as far as my generation is. So today I want to talk to you about struggle as it pertains to four categories that I think kind of crave the most wisdom. They're very universally understood and dealt with. The first one is being a parent. The second one is being married or having a partnership. The other one is having or being a child of your parents, and then also finding purpose in life. So lots of interesting things to talk about.
Struggles in every one of those counts. Every one of
Absolutely.
them.
So tell me about the struggle that you had being the child to your parents.
Oh boy. Probably the biggest struggle that I had with my parents was with my father.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my father was for many, many, many years, and I still don't really know exactly why this is true. But for so many years, certainly my early years, he was an angry man.
Mm-hmm.
He was struggling. He was struggling greatly with. He was an immigrant in this country. He was, even though he spoke English and very well when he came to this country already, he was struggling to establish himself, to find himself, to find his place.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of all of his struggle, he was very angry at those people closest to him around him.
Sure.
I saw him be very tough on my mother, and he was very tough on my brother and me. And I think particularly me. And the truth of the matter is that he just I don't know how else to put it, but I would hear from his very mouth whenever I did something that was wrong in his sight, that
Mm-hmm.
I could never do anything right. I grew up hearing those words. I have said that to some of the other interviews that we've had too. But in terms of the struggle conversation that we're
Sure.
having, it probably was at the root of the struggles that certainly I had early in my life. Over and over again, I would hear from my father that you can't do anything right. Whenever I did anything wrong or I didn't accomplish what he thinks I ought to have accomplished,
Wow.
I would hear that from him. You can't do anything right. And so that was at the root of an awful lot of our struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And as you probably know, that struggle after I grew up and my family grew up, it disappeared. But during the growing up years, it was a very, very real tough part of my life.
So do you feel like, did you feel growing up ever at all like that your dad liked you? Did you feel that he enjoyed being a father to you guys? You know, I know there's always an enjoyment of being a parent for the most part, but did you feel that from him ever?
No, not much. There were times, there were moments, there were times, um, it was a tough time. For instance, when we were having dinner together, we had to have silence. We couldn't talk.
Throughout the whole meal, huh?
Yeah, right,
Wow.
right. And even my mother, she didn't talk much. And if I started to say something, or my brother started to say something, she would say, "Oh, keep quiet, don't disturb your father." And it was, I don't really understand all of what was going on that caused that to be,
Sure.
but it was there.
So he just would, you would just eat and he would,
That's right.
did you feel like he was reflecting or just
I
sort
don't
of,
know what he was doing.
Huh.
I think that he was trying to, I think every day, trying to figure out what the heck to do with his life.
wow.
He was a teacher, he was successful as a teacher, but he always felt like he was a failure. Now, a lot of that came because his father was a tyrant. And I have an idea, which is true for so many of us fathers, that what was coming out of his mouth as a father, my father,
Mm-hmm.
was very much what he got from his own father. I think that really has a lot to do with it. The reason I'm certain of that is because when I was raising my children, your father and all of his siblings, I know that I was stunned a number of times in my life that I was hearing coming out of my own mouth in anger exactly the kinds of things that I remember saying to myself, I'm never going to tell my children what my father just said to me.
Sure.
And yet here I was doing it. So we do that. That's part of the struggle we all have in wrestling with the demons inside of us, I guess.
It's funny, you know, I've heard many times one of the, you learn from your parents in two ways. One of them is, you know, through copying behavior, obviously. The other one is by learning what not to do through the ways that, you know, they were a parent. So I know it kind of can go one of two ways. Did you ever have a different relationship with him after you left home and there was sort of nothing for him to be monitoring or, you know, watching or you fail or succeed at?
My father and I became the best of friends in his last years. It was a process that came, and I've said this before in some of these interviews, that one of the things that I realized I had to do, and I guess I was in my 40s when I finally came to this conclusion, that one of the things that I have to do is, in relation to the struggle that I have with my father, I had to forgive him.
Mm-hmm.
Because what it was doing to me, if you don't forgive somebody, it hurts you more than it does the person that doesn't get forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just made up my mind when we were all living in Dallas, and I was really raising my children, Charlie, your grandmother, and I, in those years in Dallas. I realized that I've got to forgive my father.
Mm-hmm.
I did, inside of myself.
Well, good for you.
I did inside of myself. I never told him so. But I have an idea I never needed to. Because somehow or other he knew, because our relationship changed.
Mm-hmm.
Hugely. It changed very noticeably. I noticed it, but he must have noticed it. And that was the beginning of us becoming friends.
So there was never any out loud acknowledgement of either struggle or forgiveness.
No.
Interesting.
Not in so many words, but it happened.
Sure.
Very clearly, it happened.
How was being that technology was different and communication was so different, you know, back then, when between sort of the time that you had left the house and moved on and been in Dallas with him, did you all have regular visits or communications where you were able to maintain a relationship?
Well, not for the first 10 years of my life as a husband and father. We were in Minneapolis, and then for a few years, and then in Tennessee for a short few years before moving to Texas. When we moved to Texas, we moved to Dallas where my parents lived, because I had to reestablish my life, and we decided to do that in Dallas. And within a year after moving to Dallas, we had moved to a house of our own, and that house just happened to be a block away.
That's right,
from their house. And so my children grew up, his grandchildren grew up a block away, literally. They go out the back door of our house and down the alley and into the back door of their grandfather's house, their grandparents' house. And it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time. And then after I forgave him, that's when the whole relationship of all of us began to change.
Did he soften up a bit, with the grandkids, or was he still hard on? I mean, I don't really, I have a lot of memories of my dad speaking so fondly of him. Yeah. And so, it's hard for me to remember whether there was any, struggle or sort of any of that you experienced as a son.
Well, you know what happens? Somehow or other, fathers and sons have problems. Eventually they may resolve them. My father and I resolved them. Even though unspoken, we resolved them. But the grandfather and grandmother and the grandchildren, they have no problems. So they had a grand time. They really did. My children grew up having a wonderful time with their grandparents.
That's great.
Down the block. And so it was one of those things that we just all sort of matured together and improved together. It was great. And that began really a time of total change in the family relationship.
I'm sure it helped you to be a different type of parent too, to sort of have
a little late, but yes.
Well, it's never too late, as they say.
Well, we've sort of watched that happen, haven't we?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to circle back just one more time on your experience, with struggle as a kid. So where did you get your, encouragement and your praise from? If, you sort of felt like he was kind of, what did your mom ever, did she tend to overcompensate for your dad, or was she more lenient just towards kind of following his way? What was all that like?
My mother, anything that my father did was right in my mother's eyes. So she never took sides with anybody except my father, ever. For their entire lives, it was that way. She just loved and adored him just the way he was. And there was an awful lot of difficulty in that relationship for years and years and years, but it was never that she favored her two sons over her husband, my father. Not at all.
So do you ever have fond memories of your childhood? And I know we've been over the childhood thing, but in the sense of sort of feeling guided, because everybody, it's hard to grow up, it's a struggle for everybody. Did you feel like you had guidance? Did you have great teachers? Did you have a best friend or somebody that sort of offered you that compensation, that encouragement that, you didn't necessarily always get from home?
I've thought about that a lot. I really have, especially in my later years. And especially, I have to admit, since I've been retired and we live here now.
Wait, you're retired? Sorry.
Supposedly. It's I sort of lost my train of thought there, but
that was my fault. Sorry.
It's okay. How did we get down that point?
We were talking about where you may or may not have received encouragement and praise from.
Okay. I don't know how it happened, and I have thought about it a lot, and I think the truth is, in my opinion, there has always been in my life, always, even though I had such negative things in terms of my father and son relationship with my father, there was always something that was very positive in my life. I've always been a positive person,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that really it was one of those things that no matter how bad things got, and they got bad, and how tough they got, and they got tough. I couldn't look at anything, I couldn't look at life except in a positive sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been the way it has been for me. My father saw the negative in things a lot. I really, all my life, have seen the positive side of things. That doesn't mean that I don't see negatives and I don't feel the negative side of things. I do. But overall, I've been a very positive person. I don't understand. I really don't understand.
Sure.
Coming from the background that I've just been describing to you, I don't understand how that's true. But it is. And somehow or other, that part of my struggle, I've always had a positive way of somehow or other, even in trying to solve my problems, and I've had a few, even in trying to solve my own personal struggles, I've always been able to see positive possibilities. I have no explanation other than
That's
that.
just your tool, I guess, for,
I think so.
which makes sense. I mean, and I know, gosh, you know well more than I do that, all relationships and experiences and struggles affect other relationships, experiences, and struggles.
Sure.
So tell me about some of your struggles with grandma, and, if any of that does tie into what you feel would be a struggle with your family and how you grew up, and or if it's completely separate and you sort of had a totally different struggle type experience with, being a husband.
My father was a very negative man with my mother. He was tough on her. He was awfully hard on her. He was sometimes verbally, never physically, but verbally terribly cruel. And I have to admit that I think that that's what I learned
Sure.
from him. And having learned that from him, I'm afraid that too much of my life with your grandmother was echoing an awful lot of what I knew in terms
Mm-hmm.
of that relationship, and that's the sad and unfortunate part of the whole deal. I wasn't exactly great for your mother, or for your grandmother, in terms of being kind, being always gentle or thoughtful at all. I was verbally tough,
Mm-hmm.
and the only difference is that, unlike my mother, Shari dished it out just as fast, and if you ever got in bad turf with your grandmother, I don't win, she always wins.
Sure.
It took me years. We'd been married over 30 years before I realized no sense in arguing with her, because she's going to win. I'm going to lose.
Right.
So I might as well stop arguing. I got to the, okay, yeah, you bet, kind of a stage in reaction to her whenever we get into an argument.
Did that make it easier? I mean, sort of, because there's a difference between, in my mind, between sort of settling onto an idea and accepting it, right? So there's the settle and then there's the accept. Like, to accept something is to truly, almost forgiveness in a way, for the situation. Did you feel like it made it easier in that way?
Well, I was able to forgive her for she was very tough on me because I had been so tough on her, but she couldn't let it go. And
Sure.
I don't think, I let it go, and I don't know that your grandmother ever really completely let it go.
Mm-hmm.
I was not exactly the best husband for her. I was tough on her, and I've got a lot to, when I see her next, I've got an awful lot to ask for forgiveness for.
Sure. Do you feel, a lot of managing relationships and all that is managing expectations and all of that. Do you feel like sort of trying to balance making grandma happy and making the kids happy and all, did that sort of bring you all together as a team, or did it sort of,
Mm-mm.
no?
We could have fun together. When we traveled together, we were always great together. Always when we traveled together, whether it was with the family or just your grandmother and me.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling was great. Here at the home front, that was a different story. And so we got beyond it often enough, but it wasn't a constant at home.
Sure.
Which is the sad part of it.
Did you have a priority sometimes in your mind over sort of picking your battles? Well, I either can make myself happy, or I can make my wife happy, or I can make my job happy, or I can make my kids happy. Was that a struggle for you? Is sort of choosing where to really put your energy in making people happy?
No, I think that it took a long time for me to realize that we can't, as a couple, be happy until I come to a place when I am happy with what I'm doing. And as you know, I'm a late bloomer. It took me many years to finally figure out what the heck I really wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was in my 40s, which is a pretty late time to finally figure it out. What I'm good at, what I really need to spend the rest of my life doing. And after that happened, things began to get a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a big change in any of us.
Sure.
It really does.
So if you could look back on your experience of marriage in general and how it shaped your struggles and your triumphs, what advice would you give to your grandkids? I know we could take up the whole probably hour with the rest of that, but is there anything that you can think of as it pertains to struggle, and just because that's going to be a constant in all of our futures? And
Gee, I never thought of that question. I think the answer to that question is, before you can really be happy with somebody else, you have to be happy with yourself. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to know who you are as a person and why you're here on this earth, what you're going to do with your life and why. When you know that, then the relationship with other people is going to be good. It's going to be possible.
mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're creating bad habits of relationships.
Sure.
And I had years of bad habits, so it's taken a long time to get beyond that.
So do you feel like some of your struggles in marriage, affected your struggles as a father?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. How can I be good to my kids when I'm not even good to myself and I don't even know who I am?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the worst part of it was that my children grew up in my toughest years.
Sure.
As a person, trying to figure out who I was, what am I going to do with my life, what I should be doing with my life, what I'm all about. And so it was tough for my children.
What do you think suffered? What part of your relationships with your kids suffered the most from your struggle of sort of
My
trying to figure
patience.
all that out? Your patience?
Probably didn't have anywhere near enough patience.
Well, having 5, I'm sure that was.
And
difficult.
kindness and thoughtfulness of them, because I wasn't very kind or patient with myself.
Sure. Did it change? Was it different with different kids? Different kids are going through different stuff, at different times. Did the struggles with your kids change based on what they were going through?
Sure, because each of them had their own expectations.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own expectations of the life around them. They had their own expectations of who their father should be. Your father did, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And he early on, I think, knew that he should be able to expect something more from his father, me,
Mm-hmm.
than he was getting. And he very understandably lost patience with me on that. Each of the kids, in their own way, struggled with that.
Did,
But it wasn't just their fault. What I'm really saying is, that's my doing because I didn't know who the heck I was.
right. Did they, or I mean, I guess I can ask specifically about my dad. Was he very vocal with?
Yeah, he let me know when he, above all of my 5 children, he of all of my children, let me know what he thought. Yeah, you know your father pretty well.
Yeah, well, and that's actually something that now, of course, that I'm a little older and a little wiser, I appreciate, having that dynamic with him and being able to communicate about what we're going through, as a,
You're communicating with him a lot better, a lot earlier than I did with my father.
Yeah.
And a lot earlier than I was able to with your father. Yeah.
Did just being a parent in general get harder or easier as your family continued to grow? And I know that also revolves around what types of circumstances you were in personally, but
I think that the life and my relationships with all of the family has gotten better and better and better as the years have gone by. But it's sometimes hard for one's children to always let things go from their past.
mm-hmm.
And so I can see some signs with 1 or 2 of my children that it's hard for them to totally forgive for the tough times that they had in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that causes a lot of regret.
Sure.
And a lot of sadness.
So,
certainly for me.
You talked about forgiving your dad. Do you feel like you're at a pretty good place with yourself and forgiveness with yourself for the mistakes that you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Were there any, other than just your personal struggle, were there any, outside forces that you felt kept you from doing everything you wanted to be able to do for your kids, to be a parent?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of my struggle was with the reality of adequately supporting my family
mm-hmm.
in their growing up years. It was always a struggle to find enough dollars to support a wife and 5 children the way certainly I would have liked to have supported them.
Mm-hmm.
That struggle affects everything.
Mm-hmm. And was that part of just, do you feel like if you had personally figured out sort of where you wanted to be and what you wanted to do earlier, that you would have been able to have more time to establish yourself in a way that would have allowed that?
Sure. If I knew who the heck I was and was on my way to being who I was in terms of my life, my profession, my skills, my skill set, the investment of who I am in what I do early, it would have changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think once you asked, maybe as part of this process, you asked something about if I ever had any regrets. And that's my biggest regret, that I really didn't know who the heck I was, what the heck I needed to do with my life early, before my children needed my time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd give anything if I had that opportunity to relive. It never does.
Right.
But yeah.
Are there any kind of black or white choices that you made as a parent that you wish you had made differently? Whether it was, taking this job opportunity over this one, or, drawing some line in the sand with something that you felt, you could have done differently and it would have somehow changed the struggle or made it easier or changed circumstances?
No, I don't think there was any one isolated circumstance that I could have done any differently in that regard. No, I really can't think of anything that could answer that question any differently. No.
So there's obviously a lot of, commonality throughout this topic of struggle, which I think is where most of your wisdom that you can, impart on us is leading itself to, which is, truly you finding your purpose. And that is kind of our last, of the 4 topics of struggle, and I would just love to know about some of your struggles in finding purpose, and maybe even breaking it down. I know it changed in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s, and as you grew older, sort of if you could maybe sequentially go through some high points or specific struggles that were really crucial to you when you were growing up.
If I ever had any opportunity to say to all my grandchildren, each one of them, like talking to you, one bit of advice that would affect what we're talking about for you, it would be, as soon as you can, know who you really are, what you're here on this earth for, what you're good at, and what you're supposed to be doing with your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that what you're supposed to be doing with your life that'll make you happy. That'll really, I don't mean happy in the sense of I've got enough money now and I'm having good things now and so forth. I mean in terms of who you are, what you do,
Mm-hmm.
that brings you satisfaction in spite of whether there's any money or prestige or
Sure.
or success about it. It takes some of us too long. It took me too long. But if there's any one counsel I can give, find that out. And I think that I have to tell you how I found out.
Please.
When I was in my 30s and 40s, particularly in my 40s, I began to notice something. And I began to notice that there were some people, all of them older than me, but some people of some considerable age who were very happy and content, even though they were very old. And then I noticed an awful lot of other people who were nowhere near as old as those happy people I'm just referring to. They're nowhere near as old, and they were just totally unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize why. The people who were happy at a late age had been doing what they really love to do.
Mm-hmm.
Those other people, no. They were not doing what they really love to do. And so I began to realize the most important thing for me is to find out and get about the business of doing what I really love to do. What was that? Well, you know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love to do is not exactly what you might say earns the most money in the world.
Sure.
It does not. But that became really beside the point, because I also noticed something else. That the people who had been doing, and were at some age and had been doing all their lives what they loved to do, even though they were not necessarily rich, wealthy at all, they were content
Mm-hmm.
with whatever it was that they had. Whereas the others that were the opposite, they were always struggling for the money side of it, but never were happy with what they were doing.
Well, it's interesting to think about that because, if you don't find a purpose and but you're making all this money or whatever measurable success, tool you use, you're always chasing something, right? Like you're either chasing more money or more success, or you're chasing what it is that will get you there, or you're chasing what it is that will make you happy. So it's interesting to consider it as a chase, and
It is sort of a chase, isn't it?
yeah. Did you ever think you had found your purpose and lived your life a certain way because of that, and then realized, well, gosh, this wasn't it? And
well, when I started thinking about this in those terms, I began to think, all right, what is it that I have to do for myself? And I realized that the only thing that really gives me joy and pleasure, and that I'm good at, is what I'm doing now. Being able to direct a choir and make them sound good.
mm-hmm.
And choir directing is not a money-making deal.
Mm-hmm.
It really is not. But when you're in your 40s and you don't have even your first degree quite finished, which I didn't, you realize that, okay, what are you going to do about it? Well, in this profession, you better have your tickets, your undergraduate degree and some advanced education.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I ended up in my middle life finishing my undergraduate work in one summer term up in the University of Minnesota and getting on with doctoral studies when I was 40 years old and still had family at home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nothing more than to earn a ticket so that I can say, I've got this ticket, I'm qualified,
Mm-hmm.
now I can do what I'm here on earth to do.
Mm-hmm. Was there a fork in the road that kind of, or a person or something that influenced you that made you realize, you know, your purpose as a musical professional?
Probably one, a man by the name of a composer and a teacher by the name of Paul Fettler at the University of Minnesota. He came to Chattanooga when we were living there, and naturally we got connected and so forth, and he was a good counselor, and he saw that I was struggling, and he said, Ara, you just have to get about the business of finding a way to finish your degree work and just find the way to spend the rest of your life making music. Well, I wasn't able to think about that very seriously. I had 5 mouths to feed plus cherries in mine.
Mm-hmm.
And we were poor as church mice in those days. We were really having terrible financial struggles. So we had to get through those and get beyond that limitation before I could even begin to commence to start to think about, all right, how am I going to make the changes that makes it possible for me to do what I'm doing now.
How did you get out of that situation?
I guess the best way to answer that question is you just keep working at what it is you have to do and then make the opportunities come as they can. And it took a matter of some years. From the time I had that conversation with Paul Fettler to the time I actually was able to go back to school and finish my degree work and do master's and doctoral work. It was probably, I can't remember the exact time Fettler was there. It must have been about 1959, and I got back to school in 1974.
Oh, wow.
1975. And I started working at what I ended up doing for over 20 years in Houston
Mm-hmm.
in 1979. So figure it out, 1959, 1979.
That's a bit of time.
Yes, it is.
So in terms of your purpose as a musical professional directing choirs, did you always know that you wanted it to be church choir?
No, I didn't, but that's where the opportunity is for me to spend what little talent I have and gift I have. That's where the opportunity was. I was doing other things once in a while too, a community chorus here, a community chorus there, and so forth. But that's basically where I had some experience. I'd been doing it since I was 18,
Mm-hmm.
and had always been doing it except for the 3.5 years I was in the Army.
Did your faith guide you to that, or better question, did you find yourself in your faith before you began doing that, or did that really help you to establish the faith that you have today, the faith that I know you to have?
That came later. That's an interesting question. No, that came later. It. I always knew what I believed to be certain truths, but in terms of really making my own commitment of faith, that came later.
Did that change? Did that add some purpose to your life? Did that change
Yes.
your purpose?
Yes. Yes.
That's really interesting.
Because it does something about why you're doing what you're doing. Gives you a different perspective. You're not just doing it for the glory of Ara Carapetyan. You're doing it for some other purpose. A bit of a higher purpose.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of higher purpose, and it all kind of ties together. Family, God, all of the faith, yourself, your love for yourself, all of that sort of creates a higher purpose. But there's always, to me, sort of one that clicks a little bit more.
And it's different for every one of us, Alice. It'll be different from you than it is from me. It's different from for your father than it is from you. For each one of us, that equation is a little bit different, and we each have to find our own inner sense and understanding of what that's about for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of us has.
So do you have a struggle that you feel ended up being one of your biggest blessings? Kind of a specific, whether it's a specific story, a specific time where you and grandma, couldn't put food on the table or whatever the case is, that really you look back on and say, I'm glad I went through that because it helped me to be who and what I am.
Well, if you're asking, if everything that I have experienced in my life has contributed to my spiritual understanding, whether it has been good or bad, if that's really what you're asking, the answer is, of course it has. Every single one.
Is there a specific one that stands out more? I mean, like...
No.
No?
No, and I've thought about that. No, there's not a single one. It's an accumulation. It's a series. It's a sequence of one after another. That as you live each day, you look back on yesterday and the time before that, and you see how it has contributed to today.
Mm-hmm.
No. Now, I know there are a lot of people that there's one instance that this is the big change time. That isn't the way it was for me. And it may very well be that for somebody else it's different.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it was an accumulation. It was an accumulation of time and experience. It's been sort of a steady growth,
Yeah.
and I have to admit that a few days I'll be 86. I still think that I'm still growing.
Mm-hmm.
In that way. I don't think we ever stop growing. Really don't.
I kind of hope not.
I definitely hope not.
So one of the things that resonated with me at the beginning of this was you talking about just always being positive and not really knowing where that came from. And, one of the first things I said was that my generation sort of identifies with this idea of positive thinking. There's this whole thing, well, you become what you think about. So if you just think positively, your life will turn out positively, right? So I'm just wondering if sort of some struggles that you see now in my generation, or, even the ones right before or right after me, if you relate to any of them, or if there's anything that you kind of find funny or interesting in sort of a different way that you might have experienced as a person growing up.
Everything that we do contributes to who the heck we are. I don't know if this really speaks to exactly what you are really focusing on there, but everything you do, everything you experience, every thought that you have contributes to who you become the next day,
Mm-hmm.
or the next hour, or the next week, or the next year, and that it has certainly been for me. I just think of even supposedly retiring and coming to Austin, how many years ago? 1999, 2000. Things are different for me now than they were when I came then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been an accumulation of one day, 1 week, 1 year after the other, that each adds some perspective, some insight that I didn't have before, some understanding, a little bit more, maybe hopefully wisdom that I can share.
Where do you feel like you get most of your insight and wisdom now? I mean, obviously there's a lot of reflection and things that come from within, but where do you draw most of your inspiration from these days?
I read, I think, I do a bit of praying once in a while, I listen to others, I pay attention on Sunday mornings. Um, when I when I'm preparing music with a choir, I'm thinking about what are we really talking about? How does it contribute to what we're really focusing on in this particular service that this particular piece of music is going to? Because I know what some of the scripture lessons are going to be, and how does this fit? An accumulation of all of that. What were the experiences I just had with Becky this last month, or a week, or a year? Everything contributes to it. I'll read something, I'll hear something on news or a commentary program. We watch a certain amount of public television, and there's some interesting programs. But one of the nice things about life is that you can always be taking something in, always. And I guess all of that is where it comes from, to answer your question. It's not a thing, or one or two or three or five things. It's the whole accumulation of it. It's an active participant and involvement on a daily basis, hourly basis, if you will, certainly annual basis, in what's around you in your life. And having some sense of understanding of how it all makes sense.
Well, I have to say, on a personal note, it's been very wonderful and interesting for me to have not only the experience I have with you in church and watching you do your work, especially because it is your purpose, and to see that in what we do, and to feel that, and to know that even the people who don't love you the way I do can see that. It's pretty special, and it's inspiring to be around someone who has found their purpose that way. And it's an experience that I'm never going to forget, and I know that it's part of my accumulation of things that I've done in my life that will make me who I am. So it's been a huge blessing, and actually that's a terrible segue for my last question, which
You have just made my life worthwhile, by the way.
well, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. See, that's teamwork. We all do it for each other. But
What's your last question?
So something that, and actually this can be sort of a segue, I guess. I struggle now, as a younger person, with the concept of mortality, as it pertains to you, as it pertains to my parents, as it pertains to anybody that I love, myself. Really accepting mortality as an obvious inevitability, which we all know it is. Nobody else has figured that out yet. So, or nobody else has figured out a way to not have that be the case. I'm just curious if that's been a struggle for you.
No. I don't know if it was ever something that I had to reach as a conclusion, or whether it was something I've always felt. I really don't know. But I think that I've always known that life is going to be just so long. It may be today, and I have, it's one thing for me in my 80s to say it could be today or tonight or tomorrow. It's another thing, I've been saying it for years and years and years to myself. It could be today. I have no idea when the end can come. We are mortal. We're only here for so many hours, days, years. We have no idea how long that's going to be. And slowly, I hope that I've learned that, okay, if that's true, then let's make whatever time we have as worthwhile as possible for the reason that you're here. Which is why some of the things we're talking about are important to me.
Sure.
And I think to you, to all of us. Dealing with mortality has never been a problem for me, because I've always known that it's never been a question. We're going to die.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that our spirit dies. I believe that our spirit has other purposes. Our spirit of being here, the reason for us being on life, is to think about that and to be ready for that. And I have no idea what's beyond the other side. when that hour comes, and what's on the assignment, I have no real idea. I read that book over there on the shelf, whichever one it happens to be. I've got about a dozen different versions, and I have no idea what's going to be on the other side, really. I think it's going to be good, but I don't think that we can even begin to conceive what it's going to be.
It's true. You know, it's funny actually.
And that's okay.
On the way over here, Dad and I were talking about, you know, he had a recent experience dealing with watching someone else go through loss, and you know, it sort of reminded him, well, God, I need to really just make sure everybody sort of knows how I feel about my own mortality. And it's an interest, you know, like I said, as a person who's still sort of struggling with the acceptance of that concept, not because I don't know it exists, but because it's hard for me to imagine losing people that I care about. You know, it was he feels the same way you do about, you know, he's like, my spirit will live on, you know, through me, through my brother, through friends, family, people that you touch, that know you and love you in many other ways. You know, your spirit lives on. So I think that goes back to sort of the struggle of life and finding your purpose and sort of being comfortable in yourself and knowing that the spirit that you're leaving behind is something you can be proud of, and you don't have to worry about unfinished things. And I think it's great that
we'll never finish everything, will
well, of course. Yeah, but yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about, how all of it is this big journey that leads to the end.
And the only thing that's hard to understand about that journey and the mortality aspect of it, the only thing that's hard to understand is, why is it for some of us who are on this earth that it has to be short-lived and come to an earthly end early? Why? And there's no answer for that I've ever known for that, except that it must be that somebody learns something from it. Somebody somewhere learns something about that makes life somewhere else better. I don't know of any other way to look at it.
I mean, that's the only answer I could think of, because it's certainly almost cruel to think about some of the things that people have to go, some of the loss that people have to go through.
Yeah.
Can't
there's an awful lot of hell being inflicted on people on earth too. We see it in the news every day.
Everybody's struggling in their own way.
Did I get that last question really for you?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think just understanding, you know, that you, the way you feel about mortality, you know, in your own, and sort of as it pertains to the life you live, that's exactly, you know, that's, but I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon, by the way.
I hope you have a long, long, long life, Alice.
I hope so too.
The genes are there, by the way.
I'm gonna say thank you for that.
It's not just me. Both of my grandfathers lived until they were 96.
Really?
Yeah, right. And my parents lived until they were either 88 or 89. I swear my father would have probably lived till he was 95, 96 if he hadn't had that car accident that really ended up taking him out.
Yeah. So did you feel that way about mortality when your parents passed? I mean, were you kind of, okay.
Yeah, no different. No, it's very easy for me to accept the fact that I hated to lose them.
Sure.
Especially my father, who I had learned, after all those years of having difficult times with him, had learned to love him very dearly. So much so that we talked so often on the phone in these last years that even after he died, I was still going to the phone, dialing the number, and of course he wasn't there.
Right.
And interestingly enough, your Uncle David was there.
That's right.
In that house, and so the phone was still answering. The answering
Oh,
service
funny.
was still there, and of course, that went on for a while.
Yeah.
I really did.
I imagine it's almost a muscle memory that you can't really get rid of.
Well, you know, when you end up with your father being your best friend, and you know that you're his best friend, which it turned out to be, and one lives in Dallas and the other one lives in Houston, and the phone is the only connection. That's what happens.
Hmm. Well, I'm very glad for you that you had that, you got to have that experience with him.
Me too. Me too. I treasure it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like I treasure the fact that I've got the experience, limited as it is, with all 12 of you grandchildren.
Absolutely. And proximity can definitely be an extra blessing.
Yeah. And now I've got 2 more grandchildren with Becky's 2 granddaughters, and that's sweet. That's a sweet addition that I certainly didn't expect a few years ago.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm so glad for her and being in our family, and especially being in your life, and that's another huge blessing.
It's worked for all of us, hasn't it?
It really has.
Yeah.
Good teamwork.
Yeah, I have an idea she's listening to us say that.
I think so, and we want her to hear it though. We want her to know
Of course we do.
how great she is. So.
Of course we do.
Well, what else? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you.
This is. I'm very excited to watch all of this come together, and I really do believe that stories and just perspective that we get from listening to you and really listening, it is going to be a very valuable tool for us, and that this is certainly inspiring me to have similar ideas when it comes to my family and my future family and
Right.
all of that. So I'm grateful for your time to do this. And
Me too. Me too. It's interesting, and thinking about what we're doing here. We've done enough of these things. I think your pop was saying earlier tonight. Pete was saying that we're 2/3 of the way through, and I think, didn't he say something through this project, and we have about another third to go
yeah,
in doing this. But it's interesting. A lot of the questions that some of you asked, somebody else has also asked, but from a totally different point of view and from a totally different perspective. And it's interesting to hear them and then think of them and answer them for your purpose in your case, and the same for each other person too. It's going to be interesting to see how it all comes together.
yeah, it will.
Yeah. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you.
Yeah.